Homework. All the stories about my family that you have read in this book are true. They have been fact-checked via group text, Zoom calls, and phone conversations with my sisters, aunts, cousins, and friends. Although they didn't give me express permission to document these anecdotes and reveal them to the world, I have no reason to think that they would object, because I was raised with three of the greatest snitches in history. My three sisters, Carmelita, Robin, and Sean, have never competed in track and field, but they were world-class athletes when it came to running and telling. The funny thing about this was, even though they always ratted me out, they knew I would never do it to them. They would reveal a secret to me knowing I wouldn't share it with anyone, but they would never keep my secrets. They were so dependable in that regard that I actually respect their snitch game. I don't even blame them for their shortcomings because I know they can't not snitch. They have to run and tell it. To this day, if they discover something I was trying to hide, they will casually say, with no shame whatsoever, "You know I'm gonna tell mama, right?" I don't blame my mother for my sister's propensity for tattling. It wasn't a family trait. In fact, my mother disliked it as much as I did, which is why my sisters had to figure out how to snitch in an overt way. They eventually honed their backdoor tattletale tactics down to a science by uttering one phrase that would invariably pique my mother's curiosity. "Something is wrong with Mike." There was nothing I could do about this because there was a no-hitting rule in our house that precluded all others. And of course, living with the snitch squad, you couldn't dare break the rules if I even plucked them on the earlobe. Because of how we were raised, we respected the code of the Harriet streets. But if any one of us ever found a workaround to a rule, we would argue the technicalities among each other. And besides turning in each other for violations of the house rules, my sisters were great at finding loopholes, which is why the discovery of "I was doing this first" upended the Harriet house for years to come. I'd love to tell you that I discovered IWDTF, but I can't lie. I don't know which one of us discovered this brilliant tactical loophole, probably Robin, but it was a way to make someone actually choose violence. Here's how it worked. Say you were in the corner of a room, lying on a bed or anywhere else you couldn't escape. According to the precedent set in the landmark case Harriet versus Harriet, I was legally permitted to use my arms, a stick, or anything that could block your path. And if you ran into my arm, a broom, or an object that was already in motion, it wasn't my fault and you got the snot knocked out of you. The best time to do it was when someone had to pee. When I or one of my sisters had wronged another one of us, we waited until the offending party went into the bathroom, and then we grabbed the broom and started waving it in front of the door. When the offender exited the bathroom, they would have to face the broom gauntlet, knowing that I was doing this first. I can't tell you how many times my sisters and I have nearly beaten each other to death with a broomstick. I'm also not sure if my mother even knew this loophole existed, because if you got hit with the broom when someone was doing this first, you simply didn't tell. In our prepubescent minds, doing this first was not a breach of the rules because technically, the victim was choosing to suffer the consequences by interfering in an activity that was clearly in progress. Also, we figured we weren't technically hitting the victim of the broom gauntlet. The broom was doing the hitting. I can't tell you who discovered this idiotic rule, but I can tell you the moment when it ended. As I said, my sisters were forbidden from hitting each other, but there was one thing we also knew about my sisters. They can fight. It's not like they fought well for a girl. They fight well for a middleweight MMA champion. They weren't mean and they didn't fight a lot. Most people have never seen them fight. Everyone just knows. There are a few grown men from my neighborhood who can attest to the Harriet girls' kicking ass capabilities. I don't know what started the drama, although I think it was about whose turn it was to wash dishes. All I heard is Robin in the living room yell, "I was doing this first!" I entered the kitchen just as Robin smushed Sean in the face with a moist, pine saw-soaked sponge mop. I got that bubblegut feeling that the alien expeditioners probably felt when drinking that feces-laden water. But I didn't go to the bathroom because Sean was balling up her fist. In the Harriet house. As Robin waved the broom and gave her legal disclaimer that she was doing this first, Sean uttered 5 words that would forever change the IWTF game. "Okay, well, I'm doing this." She swung on Robin. Thankfully, she missed, because she was about the length of a mop handle away from Robin. I wanted to stop it, and I also wanted to see the fight, and I also didn't want to die in a helicopter fist accident, and I also didn't want them to kill each other. As they stood face to face, smoke emanating from their noses, I knew I had to stop them. I thought about placing a bet on the winner, but I kinda like my sisters and didn't want them to perish in mutual combat. Plus, we had not yet come up with the Harriet concussion protocol. So frazzled, I ran into the middle room where my mother was sitting, unaware of the kitchen hostilities. Sensing something was amiss, she looked up and asked why I had the look of desperation on my face. I didn't know what to say. I was not used to this telling on people stuff, and according to our predetermined rules, Robin was not at fault for clocking Sean upside the head with a sponge mop. In what would later stand as a seminal moment in Harriet history, I joined the sister snitching movement by reluctantly whispering, "Something is wrong with Sean." 2 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, barely a year after the passage of the landmark Voting Rights Act, 54% of white Americans said they thought the civil rights marches were not justified, according to an August 1966 Harris poll. In October, 85% of whites responded that the demonstrations by Negroes on civil rights hurt the advancement of Negro rights. By June 1969, only 32% of respondents felt black protesters were trying to be helpful. Because of the civil rights movement, the country finally began to address the disparities, inequality, and terrorism that were the byproduct of a quadruple century of racial oppression. But when all was said and done, the majority of white people in America had reached one conclusion. Something was wrong with black people. And to fix America's racial problem, all this country needed to do was to fix black people. To address the drugs and crime and poverty caused by wealth disparities, unequal employment, and lack of community resources, they decided to police, arrest, and imprison the people who were subjected to redlining, segregation, and systemic discrimination. While the whitewashing of history has led us to believe that at the time we simply didn't understand that mass incarceration does not stop crime, we always knew it wouldn't work. Black people knew that America needed an economic solution to address racial inequities. Criminologists and sociologists knew that crime is a socioeconomic phenomenon. We have always known that arresting drug dealers and drug users doesn't affect the proliferation of drugs. We weren't buying it. In the 1980 presidential election, when the black unemployment rate was 15.1% and the white unemployment rate was 6.5%, 56% of the white electorate voted for Ronald Reagan, who proposed that welfare, affirmative action, and government handouts were causing all of America's economic woes. 9% of black voters cast ballots for Reagan to have a second term, which is less than the 11% who voted for George H.W. Bush in 1988. In 1992, when Bill Clinton was elected, he won 83% of the black vote, but only 39% of the white vote. Clinton vowed to address racial disparities, but because the blame black people philosophy had become so enshrined in white identity politics, Clinton rejected progressive ideas in favor of the narrative that had become political fact: fix black people and you can fix racism. By the presidential election of 2000, only 9% of black voters voted for George W. Bush. After Bush completed 2 terms as president in 2008, America came up with a new solution. Let's try a black guy. When Barack Obama declared his presidential campaign, all the racism you read about in previous chapters emerged. A furious search for his birth certificate was premised on the claim that he was secretly an immigrant from Africa. He had to resign from Trinity Unity Church of Christ, where his pastor, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, a graduate of historically black Howard University who served in the Marine Corps and the Navy, preached radical black liberation theology. Obama was accused of being a Muslim, consorting with radical left-wing extremists, and being anti-white. He was not a real American. His church was plotting against white people. He was a carpetbagger. To America, Barack Obama was and will always be a black president. And with him came some crazy ideas. If one were to catalog all the progressive ideas that have become mainstream over the past 50 years, they are just recycled versions of proposals that black people have championed and white America has rejected. When the U.S. Department of Agriculture made its school breakfast program permanent in 1975, the Black Panthers had been doing it for a decade as part of their 10-point program that included land cooperatives using government aid to provide adequate housing, an education system that teaches us our true history and our role in the present-day society, an end to police brutality, criminal justice reform, and an end to mass incarceration, and full employment. It wasn't just the Black Panthers. Before his death, Martin Luther King Jr.'s Poor People's Campaign advocated for full employment and an early version of universal basic income that has now become popular. The platform for Jesse Jackson's 1988 presidential campaign included provisions for LGBT rights, increasing infrastructure spending, reprioritizing the war on drugs, taxing the wealthiest 10%, free community college, reparations, universal health care, and voting rights reform. The only meaningful gun control legislation ever passed in America came at the behest of the Congressional Black Caucus, who opposed the 1993 crime bill, offering an alternative version that addressed the cocaine epidemic with drug treatment, asked for $3 billion for early crime intervention, and included the Racial Justice Act to highlight and solve the disparities in sentencing. These requests were considered too radical back then, because we had already decided that something was wrong with black people. Therefore, America's racial problem could easily be solved if black people just focused on themselves. Meanwhile, white America could help black people by locking up criminals in the black communities that emerged as a result of redlining and segregation, telling them to focus on education in the unequal schools that Jim Crow built, and showing them how to pull themselves up by the bootstraps that white people bought with New Deal dollars. Unfortunately, Barack Obama couldn't fix America. By simply being the black president, he became the symbol for what America could achieve, even if most white people didn't vote for Barack Obama. I voted for Obama has become the rallying cry for people who believe in a post-racial America. The fact that his tenure as head of state did not reverse 400 years of entrenched white supremacy shows that he was just a president. But while there are valid criticisms of Obama's two administrations from black and white, liberal and conservative, perhaps his most important legacy is that the result of his presidency proved that there is nothing wrong with black people. There is something wrong with America. 8 years, 2 months, and 16 days after the election of Barack Obama, Donald J. Trump became president of the United States of America. If one were to create a sentient being out of America's past and present, it would look like Donald Trump. It would hate anyone who was not white. It would believe itself to be an infallible, stable genius. It would hide secrets. It would whitewash its past. It would lie incessantly. It would rip brown babies from their mother's arms. It would criminalize Muslims. It would mirror the intellect and sentiment of the vast majority of people who fill the country from sea to shining sea. Donald Trump is America. Donald Trump is a rich, powerful man who has convinced the world that his empire was earned through hard work, not a sordid past that includes, but is not limited to, taking advantage of his privilege. He made his fortune like America made its fortune, taking land, profiting off financial malfeasance, conning the masses, and refusing to pay black and brown people for their work. He became the world's most powerful man in the world's most powerful country through a system that rewards white men for being white men. He has no particular intelligence or expertise, yet he has convinced his poor Caucasian co-conspirators that the only way they can succeed is by placing their foot on the neck of the people who don't look like them. The brown people, the black people, the non-Christians. Isn't that the most America idea of them all? And like America, most people were willing to ignore his racism for the sake of self-preservation. Unlike the white people who claimed Obama was proof of a post-racial America, even though most white voters didn't vote for him, Trump voters proudly admit that they cast their ballots for an unapologetic bigot, just like the white supremacists of the Reconstruction and the white nationalists of the Civil Rights era proudly proclaimed their objections to racial equality. They overlooked the inherent evil of his immigration policy, his fight against critical race theory, and his championing of whiteness, just like this country overlooked Jim Crow, segregation, lynching, and the evil that remains in every sector of society. They have forgotten how Trump excused a white supremacist murder in Charlottesville, Virginia, just like America excuses white supremacy as an institutional reality. And he lies. Like America lies. Despite what the numbers say, he claimed his inauguration was the biggest inauguration in the history of inaugurations. He claimed he passed more legislation than any president ever. He said he won the Electoral College by a record amount. He said he was reelected. Truth be damned, facts didn't matter. And according to Trump, America is the greatest country on earth despite what the numbers say. We are a beacon of freedom and liberty even though we rank first in the world's prison population. We are the smartest nation in the world despite ranking 14th in education and second in ignorance. We believe in equality and tolerance despite ranking number 1 on the list of the most racist countries in the world. See? I told you we were number 1. Trump promised he would fix our healthcare system like America has been telling us for decades, but he made it worse. He preached prosperity for the middle class, but his policies benefited the wealthy. He promised peace for starting petty conflicts around the world. And just like this country has done since its inception, America is all too willing to remain blind to his transgressions, even with definitive proof. This country was willing to watch Trump and his minion of secondhand liars tell bald-faced lies to the American public without penalty. And that is America. Like its history, this nation is a mirage. Its greatness is a figment of a collective white imagination that envisions a bright, shining star where there is only a dumpster fire. America is a con artist. It is a counterfeit farce of a white country convinced of its own supremacy. It is a boot on every black throat and noose on every Negro neck. Yet we remain. Like the perseverance that overcomes white supremacy, like the love that conquers hate, like the truth that outshines injustice, like the backs and hands and muscles and minds of the beloved black diaspora that will collectively build this imperfect union into a home. If this nation ever truly becomes a post-racial society with liberty and justice for all, let the history of black people in America reflect, we were doing it first. Unit review. 3 little questions. Number 1. Racism ended when? A. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. B. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act. C. Obama became president. Or D. America had a racial reckoning in 2020. Number 2. What is the biggest myth in American history? A. White supremacy. B. America is a democracy. C. Liberty and justice for all. Or D. The history part. 3. What is the main difference between American history and Black history? A. Who writes the books? B. Same difference between fact and fiction? C. Black history is American history. Or D. There is no such thing as America.